speaker is Cate Faehrmann. I first met Cate a few weeks ago now when we both were at a fundraising event for Dying with Dignity, and as I think many of you will know in the room, Cate has very, very wonderfully decided to put forward a bill for next year, and it will be debated. I think many of us would wonder if it's going to have any success, but I can also say to you that I know that with legislative reform, I mean, often, you just need to keep on going and keep on going. The field I work in, it often takes 20, 30 years from the first conception of a piece of legislation before it actually gets adopted. So, Cate, I think you're a wonderful role model for politicians, and I'm longing to hear from you. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon, and thank you all for coming here today. This is the third Dying with Dignity forum, I think, that third in a row, third year, that I've hosted this event on behalf of Dying with Dignity, and I have to say that every event is incredibly emotional as well as very inspiring, and thanks Dying with Dignity, Richard Mills and everyone for organising this and for supporting me on this throughout the year. As you know, that I'm just really your voice in Parliament on this issue, and I took over this when I came into Parliament in September 2010. I took over this issue from my colleague Ian Cohen, who introduced this bill into Parliament about 10 years ago now, and it failed quite significantly actually at the time in the New South Wales Upper House. So since then we've been looking at this issue and I suppose meeting with stakeholders and working out the best way and the best time to introduce this legislation. So what I've been doing in the last few months is collecting personal stories from some of you and hearing stories like Gillian's, really, from either on emails or speaking to people in person or visiting people in their homes, and just hearing incredibly moving, incredibly inspiring, I suppose, in terms of me from a political perspective wanting to ensure this law is passed. And what I thought I would do in my very short 10 minutes is just read a few of the stories and just then tell you kind of where things are up to politically, just reading some excerpts from the stories, and I'll tell you why after this, why stories are so important. Is Rhonda McCarthy in the audience today? No, not today. Okay. So those of you may have read Rhonda's story. I believe it's on the Dying with Dignity website. Her husband, Wayne, was diagnosed with the incurable brain disease progressive supranuclear palsy in 2009, and there was no cure. And Rhonda writes this incredible story that I believe will almost be quite a pivotal story for the movement in a way over the next few years. And Rhonda writes, "We were devastated, but there it was, a few years, on average 3 to 8 from diagnosis, of progressively not being able to walk, talk, write, eat or see properly, of constant falling, followed by a death, usually by choking." Rhonda writes that Wayne, her husband, joined Exit International that year when he realised what was ahead of him, and he was a very active man, very successful businessman, so active. She writes things like, he used to heli ski and, do triathlons and clearly lived a very full, active life. And she details the effort that Wayne went to try and find a way out. She details the effort he went to try and find the drug Nembutal and the dead ends that for him in that search. And it's very, I do recommend everybody reading Rhonda's story if you can. But eventually he was successful in finding Nembutal, and I've spoken to a number of people now about their efforts in trying to secure that drug if they are wanting to go and if they are wanting to die. And she talks about the goodbyes and the way that eventually he does go is in a hotel room where the only people that know about this and know that this is the way that he's going to go are Wayne and his wife Rhonda. And it's a very moving story, and down to the detail of the police seizing the computer, Wayne's computer, 2 weeks after the death to find out where he secured Nembutal. Like, that's the crime to find out. And Rhonda finishes this story saying if Wayne was alive today, he would be in a terrible state. He would no doubt be in a wheelchair, unable to speak and see properly, and being fed through a tube, just waiting for a long, lingering death. If euthanasia had been legal, Wayne would not have had to do it so early, and we would have had him a little longer. Our family, and in fact his close friends, would have been able to know what he was intending and to say goodbye. They had all understood, and it turns out goodbyes are important. I would have been able to be with him and comfort him in his last moments. It would have been hard, but not as terrible as having to leave him to do it on his own. We would not have had to go through those last terrible months hiding what he intended. I believe profoundly that Wayne did the right thing for himself and for all of us who loved him, if only euthanasia had been legal. And Rhonda is a Catholic and has been, she admitted to me at the Dying with Dignity forum, reasonably conservative politically, but that this issue has very much changed, not her Catholicism or her religion, I don't think, but changed her view of a lot of things. And I think we've seen the battle with some of the religious forces in this place. We know that we will see this next year. I think I spoke about that last year, what happened in South Australia when the bill was introduced there, and the right wing of the Catholic Party, particularly within the Catholic Church, particularly within the Labor Party, came down with an incredible amount of force on a couple of the MPs that were wavering. Another story, and tell me when I've got about a couple of minutes left, Simon. Thank you. Another story. It is my personal, and I won't say names if I haven't checked with these people yet. It is my personal experiences of losing more than 30 family members and friends to hideous diseases and incurable conditions that has forged my absolute belief in the need for our right to self-determination or choice to be recognised and for voluntary euthanasia to be legally available for all. I have experienced firsthand the inadequacies of palliative care. I was at the bedside of my friend, 57, who had motor neurone disease and died of suffocation. My cousin, 24, who was pleading to be helped to die to end the unrelenting pain of melanoma cancer. My aunt, 95, who finally died after 5 long years curled up in a fetal position in a nursing home bed. I received one as well from a parish priest and hospital chaplain. However, I do feel that at some stage we have to stop talking about euthanasia and start doing something about it. As a parish priest and hospital chaplain, I was privileged to watch many people die. Sadly, many of those people died unable to have a dignified death because they knew that if they chose to have a good death, brackets euthanasia, they would be condemned and treated as sinners by their fellow Christians. Other people I knew as psychiatric patients were so desperate that they resorted to jumping off bridges, diving in front of trains, etc., because the church and the state turned a blind eye and a deaf ear to their request for the right to die with dignity. I believe that we have to stop forcing people to take illegal and desperate measures. This to me is a matter of great urgency. And I'll finish with the stories with the kind of closing paragraphs of Sarah Edelman, the Vice President of Dying with Dignity, who's here today, who wrote the story about her father who died of a cancer. I think it might have been this year. I had been an advocate for end-of-life choices for many years, but until this experience I never fully appreciated how difficult and distressing the process of dying is for the patient and their loved ones. I also never understood the limitations of palliative care. Dad was in one of the best palliative care facilities in Australia. The nurses were great and most of the staff, including the reception staff, volunteers and cleaners, were caring and respectful. There was provision for the needs of family members, which made it easy to spend long periods with our loved ones. But this did not prevent suffering. In spite of the earlier reassurances of the palliative care team, dying was a cruel business, even in the best facility. While not eating spared Dad much pain, it did not prevent his suffering. In the last weeks of his life, he was totally wretched. Dad had never previously been interested in euthanasia, but if there had been any quality of life to be extracted over the next few days, he would have seized it. But Dad repeatedly asked to die because each day he felt worse and he knew that there was only more suffering to come. For me, the experiences reinforced the need to keep up the good fight. No one should be forced to endure pointless suffering as their life is ending. And I've received many more of these letters, and I've spoken with many people about this. I've met Laura Dana at the back there, who is suffering MS and is unable to die if that is her wish. And I've met with her and spoken to her. She's spoken to me actually about her frustration with the likes of people from the right, the religious right, in this place. She's spoken to me about her frustrations with members like Fred Nile, and I think actually some members of the Labor Party are a little bit more influential on this debate than Fred is. But and Laura Dana's frustration that many of the MPs who feel so righteous about this have not met with her and refuse to meet with patients who are, and loved ones of patients and voluntary euthanasia advocates to discuss their views and to talk to them about why they won't give them the right to die. Stories are incredibly important for this campaign. I hope to be introducing legislation on this in the first half of next year. And what changes people's position on issues like this are personal stories, hearing from constituents. So you always have people who are solid supporters on issues of moral judgment. You always have people where you know where they stand, and you'll have people on the other side where you know they stand. The people in the middle are the members of Parliament who I urge you all to talk to. When I introduced this year, a very different issue but similar in some ways in terms of the amount of thought needed on how to vote on it. When I moved the marriage equality or same-sex marriage motion in the House this year, in the upper house, it was a motion that called on the Commonwealth Parliament to amend the Marriage Act to recognise marriage between any two people, any two adults. That motion passed the New South Wales upper house. 2 Christian Democrats, 2 shooters, so take them out of the picture, and it still passed 22-16. And you could see the people on the other side were all very strongly religious. They held strongly held religious beliefs or views. Possibly they were in that political party because of their alignment with certain factions in that party. Many of the people who came over had heard from people, had heard from parents of young gays and lesbians, for example, or some, an 80-year-old gay man who still wanted to marry his partner after decades with him. Those stories swayed people. I had one visit of parents and friends of lesbians and gays who went and lobbied very reasonably conservative MPs, but not really religious, and they were influenced by that. And when MPs get up to vote on something like this, it is very hard. It is much harder for them to vote against giving any of you the right to die with dignity if you have been in their office and talked to them about why it's so important to you or shared your story. I can't tell you how valuable that is and how important that is. So next year, I was about to say this year, I'll be asking all of you, thank you for some of you who have shared your story with me, even if you don't have an immediate personal story, just why you are here today, why you believe in voluntary euthanasia or doctor-assisted suicide so much. send emails and make appointments with your local MPs, please. It is absolutely critical that we do. I don't know whether we're going to get it through next time, but if the very Conservative New South Wales Upper House can vote for and support a motion on marriage equality, I think we are moving as a society. We are progressing. I think we'll improve from last time. Fingers crossed, we will get this through at some stage in the future. Thank you.
Kate, would you just see if there's time for one question to Cate, if anybody would like to ask her. This lady here. Thank you.
I don't understand why so many doctors are against helping people to die. Why can't we have the Dutch example where there are a number of doctors in a group with the family's permission and the person who desires it to go ahead with the relief of somebody's suffering? What do you feel about that?
Well, we do have, there are some doctors, of course, in Dying with Dignity and on the board still, I understand, who are supportive of this. My draft bill as it stands, which is right to do, of course, enables doctors to refuse to treat if they receive a request, but they have to refer. And I think that should be enough to deal with any concerns that doctors should have. I know that the medical fraternity, of course, as we know, is split on this, but the more we hear from health professionals, including some, I've also received emails from people who work in palliative care and have worked in palliative care for many years who support this. The more that we hear from people within the health professionals, you know, I think the better it will be. It's a key sticking point, though, that we have to get right. And I think the best way, actually, over the next few months is as much consultation as possible to wheel out those doctors who are prepared to assist if this becomes law.
That was actually a perfect question to segue to our next speaker, who is a doctor and is a doctor who works in intensive care. Ken Hillman is Professor of Intensive Care at the University of New South Wales, and he also works in intensive